They say every mother has a breaking point. Mine came the day I realized the woman my son loved, the woman I'd welcomed into my home, had tried to erase every trace of him from this world. They thought age had made me weak, that silence would keep me afraid. But they were wrong. I may be 62, but the blood that runs in me built empires, buried pain, and learned how to fight back. My name is Evelyn Carter, and this is the story of how grief became my weapon, and how I refused to let my son's legacy drown in greed. When you've lived long enough, you start to measure life not by the years you've survived, but by the moments that built you, and the ones that broke you. For me, everything began with Martin Carter, my husband. He was a builder in every sense of the word, of houses, of dreams, of a family name that once meant nothing and later stood over half of North Carolina's skyline. I stood beside him through every storm, every sleepless night, and when he passed away from a sudden heart attack, I promised myself that Carter Construction wouldn't die with him. People said, "She's too old, too soft, too polite to run a company full of men." They didn't know me. The day after Martin's funeral, I walked into that boardroom wearing black, looked every man in the eye, and said, "This company bears my name too." From that moment, no one questioned me again. But power is a lonely companion. At night, when the city lights dimmed and the house fell silent, I would stand by the window of my study, watching the reflection of a woman who looked strong but felt hollow. The only heartbeat that kept me anchored to this world belonged to my son, Daniel. Daniel was the best parts of both his parents. His father's intelligence, my patience, and a kindness that money could never buy. He could charm anyone, yet he never used that charm selfishly. Every morning, he'd stop by my office before heading to a construction site. "Mom," he'd say, "I want Carter Construction to be about people, not profit." And I would smile, pretending not to tear up. Our Sundays were sacred. Just the two of us at the kitchen table, pancakes, black coffee, and our ritual of talking about anything but business. He'd tell me about architecture, about wanting to design homes that breathed. I'd listen, half mother, half student, proud beyond words. Then, one spring evening, he came home with a spark in his eyes I hadn't seen since his childhood. "Mom," he said, "I met someone." Her name was Vanessa Reed. I still remember the first time she stepped into our house. Tall, elegant, wearing a navy dress that looked expensive but tasteful. She spoke with perfect rhythm, too perfect. Her eyes scanned every detail of the living room like she was taking inventory. Vanessa was polite, intelligent, and stunning. Yet there was something about her presence that felt rehearsed. She complimented the house, my cooking, even the scent of the roses in the hallway. Daniel was enchanted, completely unaware that the woman holding his hand was also calculating everything she touched. Within months, they announced their engagement. Daniel was radiant. His smile made me believe that maybe, just maybe, love could be that simple. I wanted to be wrong about Vanessa. So I stayed quiet, suppressing every instinct that told me she wasn't who she pretended to be. The wedding was magnificent. Ivory silk drapes, crystal chandeliers, guests from every social circle. As I stood watching my son exchange vows under the warm glow of golden lights, I tried to believe those words, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health. But when Vanessa turned her head toward me during the ceremony, our eyes met. Her lips curved, not in love, not in gratitude, but in silent triumph. It was the kind of smile a person gives when they've already won a game you didn't know you were playing. That night, as the music faded and guests departed, Daniel hugged me and whispered, "Mom, everything's finally perfect." I kissed his forehead, forcing a smile. "I hope so, sweetheart," I whispered back. Because deep down, a mother always knows when the wind is about to change. They say the first cracks in a marriage are the quiet ones, the ones no one else hears but the walls. At first, Daniel and Vanessa looked perfect together. They attended charity galas, appeared on business magazine covers, and were often called the golden couple of Raleigh. But behind those photographs, I could feel something shifting, something I couldn't yet name. Vanessa began visiting our office more often. At first, she said she wanted to learn the ropes, to understand how the company worked. I didn't object. Carter Construction was a family legacy after all, but her questions weren't about projects or clients. She asked about shares, insurance policies, inheritance laws. I noticed her walking through my husband's old office, touching his antique pen, staring at the framed company charter on the wall that read, "Carter Construction shall always remain under the Carter family." Her expression wasn't admiration. It was calculation. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by my house, looking uneasy. He sat at the same dining table where we had once shared laughter and pancakes. "Mom," he said softly, "Vanessa thinks maybe it's time for you to slow down a bit. You've worked all your life. Maybe take a step back." I put my cup down slowly. "Take a step back? Daniel, your father and I built this company brick by brick." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know. She just worries about your health, that's all." But his tone told me he didn't believe it either. After that, things changed. I'd call Daniel for lunch, and he'd say, "Maybe another time." When I visited their house, Vanessa would greet me with a smile that never reached her eyes. I started to see less of my son and more of her reflection in his decisions. Then came the night that ended everything. It was late autumn, the air sharp, the city lights shivering in the rain. Daniel had just closed a major contract. He called me on his way home. His voice was tired but happy. "Mom, I'll see you tomorrow morning," he said. "We'll have breakfast like old times." I remember smiling. "I'll make your favorite, blueberry pancakes." He laughed, that same warm laugh that once filled our house with light. That was the last time I ever heard my son's voice. At 1:47 a.m., the phone rang. It was the police. They said there had been an accident on Highway 19. His car had spun off the road and flipped twice. Vanessa was in the passenger seat. She'd survived with minor injuries. Daniel had died instantly. I remember the sound that came out of me. It wasn't a cry. It was something deeper, a kind of hollow animal ache that ripped through my chest. By the time I reached the hospital, Vanessa was sitting in a wheelchair, wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by police. Her eyes were dry. Not swollen from tears, not red, just blank. I walked past her, straight to my son's body. He looked peaceful, too peaceful. I held his cold hand and whispered, "You promised breakfast." Days turned into weeks. The funeral came and went. Vanessa played the grieving widow perfectly. Reporters called her strong, brave, a symbol of resilience. She wore black and spoke softly about Daniel's dreams. But when everyone left and the house fell quiet, she turned to me and said something I'll never forget. "It's time to move forward, Evelyn. We both have our lives to live." A week later, she cashed Daniel's insurance check, $200,000, and started the paperwork to transfer the remaining company shares in her name. Then she disappeared. No calls. No address. No trace. Just silence. And that's when I realized, the accident that took my son wasn't fate. It was strategy. 6 months had passed since Daniel's death, and yet time hadn't moved. Every sunrise felt identical to the one before it, quiet, pale, and empty. I'd wake up in that enormous house that used to echo with laughter, and all I could hear now was the faint creak of floorboards and the ticking of a clock that refused to stop. The silence wasn't peace, it was punishment. Every morning, I would walk past Daniel's old room. His shoes were still under the bed. His shirts still hung neatly in the closet, the way he left them. The faint smell of his cologne, that same musky cedar scent, lingered in the air, haunting me. Sometimes, I'd sit on his bed and imagine hearing him call me from downstairs, "Mom, you're making coffee, right?" But it never came. Only the echo of what once was. The world had moved on. People always do. But grief is a kind of gravity. It keeps you trapped in a place no one else can see. I kept running the company because that was the only part of my son I could still hold on to. Carter Construction had become a machine that functioned, but without a soul. Board meetings felt colder, investors were impatient, and the young engineers whispered when I entered the room. They thought I was too old, too fragile, too broken to lead. They were wrong. I wasn't fragile. I was waiting. Waiting for truth to reveal itself, the way rot eventually surfaces beneath the paint. Then, one afternoon in late February, truth finally found me. It was raining, that soft Carolina rain that seems to soak straight into your bones. I had driven out of the city for a site inspection, one of the old projects Daniel had been leading before he died. The road wound through half-developed land, dotted with construction cranes frozen midair like skeletons. Ahead, a rusted sign read, "Carter Heights, Phase 2. I slowed the car. It had been months since anyone set foot there. The site looked deserted, bare steel frames, shattered glass, and pools of muddy water reflecting a sky heavy with storm clouds. The wind carried a faint metallic whine through the unfinished structures. Then I saw it. A black SUV parked near the central foundation pit. The engine was off, but faint exhaust still curled from the tailpipe. At first, I thought it was one of our old contractors checking the site. But then a figure stepped out of the driver's seat, tall, slim, wearing a long gray coat. She moved like someone being watched, glancing over her shoulder with every few steps. When her face turned slightly toward the wind, my stomach dropped. It was Vanessa Reed. For a few seconds, I forgot to breathe. She looked thinner than before, her hair cut shorter, dyed a lighter shade. Even from a distance, I recognized that meticulous posture, that deliberate way she carried herself. Like someone still pretending to be in control. I ducked behind the half-collapsed fence, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Vanessa opened the rear door of the SUV and pulled something out, a large gray plastic storage bin. It took both her hands to lift it. Whatever was inside, it was heavy. She staggered slightly, cursing under her breath, and began dragging it across the dirt toward the open pit. Rain splashed against the bin, leaving streaks of mud down its sides. She looked around, scanning the area, and then crouched, her hands trembling as she struggled with the lid. For a second, everything went still. Then I heard it, a sound that froze my entire body. A faint cry. Small, muffled, desperate. The unmistakable cry of a baby. My throat went dry. I blinked once, hoping it was the wind, but it came again, weak, fragile, terrified. And that's when I screamed her name. Vanessa. The sound tore through the empty site like a siren. She jumped, startled, her eyes wide, wild. For a split second, she locked eyes with me. The rain blurred everything, but I could still see it, the horror, the guilt, the sudden calculation of what to do next. Then she ran. She didn't even close the bin. She turned, slipped once in the mud, then sprinted to the car. Her coat flared behind her as she yanked the door open and gunned the engine. Tires spun, mud flew, and the SUV roared out of the sight, vanishing into the gray rain. I stood frozen for half a breath. Then instinct took over. I ran, as fast as a 62-year-old woman could run, lungs burning, heart hammering. The ground was slippery, and twice I almost fell, but I didn't stop. I reached the pit, my clothes soaked, my shoes sinking in the mud. When I reached the edge, I saw it, the bin, half submerged in muddy water. I waded in without thinking. The cold hit me like knives, but I didn't care. My trembling hands gripped the handles, pulling with everything I had until it slid onto solid ground. The lid was jammed shut. I slammed my palm against it until it popped open. And there he was. A baby. Wrapped in a drenched blanket, pale as paper, lips blue, tiny chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. His hair, dark soft, like Daniel's when he was a baby, clung to his forehead. I fell to my knees. Oh God! The words barely escaped my throat. I pressed my fingers to his neck, a pulse. Weak but there. I ripped my coat off and wrapped him in it, holding him close to my chest. Hold on, I whispered. Hold on, little one. You're safe now. I've got you. I ran back to my car, slipping twice, mud coating my hands and knees. The baby whimpered once. A sound so small and yet so powerful it made my heart break all over again. As I sped toward the hospital, the wipers barely kept up with the rain. Red lights blurred as I flew through intersections, horn blaring, my voice trembling as I prayed aloud, God, don't take him too. Not him. Please, not him. When I burst through the emergency doors, soaked to the bone, nurses rushed toward me. Please. I shouted, handing the tiny bundle to the first pair of arms I could find. He's alive, just help him. Doctors gathered. Machines beeped. Voices overlapped. I stood there, shivering, my breath shallow, my heart somewhere between terror and hope. Minutes felt like hours. Then one nurse turned to me, a young woman with kind eyes, and said softly, he's breathing on his own now. I sank into a chair, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Tears ran down my face and mixed with the rain still dripping from my hair. I didn't know who this child was. I didn't know why Vanessa had wanted him gone. But deep inside, something unshakable whispered the truth. This wasn't just any child. This was my grandson. And from that moment forward, I made myself a silent promise, one that would define everything I did next. I couldn't save my son. But I would save his child. Even if it meant burning the world down to do it. The rain had stopped by the time I left the hospital that night, but my body still shook as if the storm had followed me home. I sat alone in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The baby's cries still echoed in my ears, faint, fragile, yet stronger than any sound I'd heard since Daniel's death. That tiny voice had brought me back from the edge of silence. Inside the hospital, they had taken the child to the neonatal unit. The nurses had wrapped him in warm blankets, placed tiny sensors on his chest, and whispered words of reassurance as if speaking to an angel who hadn't decided yet whether to stay in this world. I had stood there, watching from the glass window, unable to move, unable to breathe. I didn't know what tied me to that baby, but I felt it. The same invisible thread I had once felt with Daniel when he was born. When the doctor finally approached me, he spoke carefully, as if every word might collapse the fragile calm in the room. He's stable now, he said. Dehydrated, malnourished, but he's going to make it. You said you found him at a construction site. I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. Yes. Carter Heights. It used to belong to my son. He made a note, then looked at me with something between confusion and admiration. You probably saved his life. For the first time in months, I felt the smallest flicker of purpose ignite inside me. The police came shortly after. 2 detectives, a man and a woman. The man asked procedural questions, time, location, description of the vehicle. But the woman, Detective Rachel Monroe, looked at me differently. She wasn't just hearing a story, she was reading the truth between the words. Did you recognize the driver? She asked gently. I hesitated. Then I said it. Yes. Her name is Vanessa Reed. Her pen froze midair. And who is she to you? My late son's wife, I said quietly. And I believe she tried to kill his child. The words hung in the air like a confession. The male detective looked skeptical, But Rachel's eyes didn't waver. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "we'll need to verify everything. The baby will go into temporary protective custody until we know more." Temporary custody. Those two words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. They were talking about a system, rules, protocols, bureaucracy, but this wasn't paperwork to me. This was blood. My son's blood. I watched them take the baby away for forensic testing, DNA, blood type, all the procedures that stripped human connection down to data. I knew what they would find, but I couldn't wait to see it on paper. I needed proof, the kind that silences every doubt, every whisper that grief had made me delusional. That night, I went home to an empty house, but something inside me had changed. I didn't feel weak anymore. I felt focused. I lit a candle beside Daniel's photograph and whispered, "I found him, sweetheart. I found your son." The next few days were a blur of phone calls, interviews, and sleepless nights. The detectives traced Vanessa's SUV through traffic cameras. She had abandoned it 2 towns away, near an old rest stop. Inside, they found traces of baby formula, torn fabric, and a single gold bracelet engraved with her initials. When Detective Monroe called to tell me, I felt the tremor in her voice. "We're running her financials," she said. "There are inconsistencies in her insurance claims. It looks like your son's accident might not have been an accident after all." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply closed my eyes and whispered, "I knew it." 2 days later, the DNA report arrived. I still remember the envelope, white, ordinary, almost insulting in its simplicity. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside, a single line of text. Paternity confirmed, Daniel Carter, 99.99% match. It felt as though time stopped. My son was gone, but a part of him was alive, warm, breathing, tangible. That baby wasn't just blood, he was redemption. Proof that the love I'd lost hadn't vanished into dust. I went back to the hospital that afternoon. When they led me to the incubator, I saw him, small, fragile, with tiny fingers curled into fists. His skin was pink now, his breathing steady. I reached out, pressed my palm to the glass, and whispered, "You're safe now, little one. Grandma's here." The nurse beside me smiled softly. "He doesn't have a name yet. Would you like to give him one?" I looked at her, then back at him. The name came to me like a whisper carried by memory. "Noah," I said. "His name is Noah." She wrote it down. Baby Noah Carter. The first time I heard it aloud, I felt something inside me heal, just a fraction, but enough to breathe again. From that day on, I visited Noah every morning and every night. The nurses began to recognize me. They'd bring me coffee and let me sit by his side long after visiting hours. Sometimes I'd hum to him, the same lullaby I used to sing to Daniel. Other times, I'd just watch the rise and fall of his tiny chest and silently promise that I would never let anyone hurt him again. But the world doesn't grant peace without a price. Because just when I thought the worst was behind me, Detective Monroe called again. "Mrs. Carter," she said, her tone cautious, "we found something in your son's case files. The brake line on his car was cut. It was deliberate." The room spun. The floor seemed to vanish beneath me. My knees went weak as her voice continued, steady but grim. "We have enough evidence to open a homicide investigation. And based on the insurance transfers, we believe Vanessa Reed orchestrated everything." I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to hold back the scream rising in my throat. My son hadn't died in an accident. He had been murdered, by the woman he trusted most. And now she was out there. Somewhere. I turned toward the incubator where Noah slept peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling with quiet innocence. And I made a promise, not as a grieving mother, but as a woman reborn through rage and purpose. "You took my son from me, Vanessa. But I swear to God, you will never take his child. I thought the hardest part was over when I pulled that baby from the mud. I thought saving him from death meant the nightmare had ended. But I was wrong. The real fight had only begun, and this time, my enemies weren't murderers hiding in the dark. They were lawyers, officials, and rules written by people who had never watched their family drown in front of them. The day after the DNA confirmation, Detective Monroe met me at the hospital. Her face was grave, but her voice was calm. Too calm, the kind of voice people use when they're about to say something you won't like. Mrs. Carter, now that we've confirmed your biological connection to the child, we'll begin the process of temporary custody through family services. It's not automatic. Not automatic. I repeated, disbelief tightening my throat. He's my grandson. She sighed. I know. But you'll need to go through the system. Background checks, psychological evaluations, a home inspection, the whole process. I stared at her as if she'd just told me the sky was green. I don't need the system to tell me I'm a grandmother. Monroe looked sympathetic but unmoved. We just have to make sure the child's environment is safe. Safe. The word made me laugh. A dry, humorless sound. You think he's safer with strangers than with the woman who saved his life? The detective didn't answer. She just slid a form across the table and said, "Sign here, and social services will contact you tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that baby, Noah, lying under hospital lights, fighting to breathe. My son had died because someone wanted money. And now the system was asking me to prove that I was worthy to protect what was left of him. When morning came, I made coffee but couldn't drink it. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, hair grayer, eyes tired but fierce. For the first time since Daniel's death, I saw not a grieving mother but a soldier. At exactly 9 o'clock, a knock echoed through the hallway. I opened the door to find a woman standing there. Mid-20s, short dark hair, holding a tablet and a stack of papers. Her badge read Amber Lewis, Child Protective Services. Her smile was professional, polite, and detached. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter. I'm here to discuss temporary guardianship of baby Noah." I gestured for her to come inside. She glanced around the foyer as if she were inspecting a museum. Her eyes moved over the marble staircase, the family portraits, the antique furniture. "You have a beautiful home," she said softly. "And big. Do you live here alone?" "Yes." She nodded, tapping something on her tablet. "And your husband is deceased, correct?" "Yes. 10 years now." "And your son, Daniel?" I took a deep breath. "He was murdered. By his wife." Amber froze for a moment, stylus in hand. "I'm sorry for your loss." I gave a tight smile. "Don't be. I plan to make sure she pays for it." She blinked, perhaps unsure whether to respond. Then she said, "We'll need to conduct a few evaluations. Standard procedure. May I see the rest of the house?" I led her through each room, Daniel's old office, the library, the sunroom overlooking the garden. I'd kept everything spotless, as if I'd known this inspection was coming. The smell of lemon polish filled the air. But when we reached Daniel's bedroom, now just as he'd left it, she paused by the framed photo on his nightstand, Daniel holding a blueprint, smiling at a construction site. "He looks proud," she said quietly. "He was," I whispered. "He built everything with his own hands. Even this house." Amber smiled faintly, then returned to her checklist. "You'll also need a baby-safe environment. Nursery, crib, locks, gates, that sort of thing. We'll send you a list." After 2 hours, she finally closed her tablet and said, "You seem stable, Mrs. Carter. But there will be psychological testing too. Nothing invasive, just to ensure emotional readiness. I wanted to laugh again. Emotional readiness? I'd buried a husband and a son, pulled a dying baby from a pit, and faced down a murderer. What more readiness did they want? Still, I nodded. Whatever it takes. When she left, I sat on the couch and stared at Daniel's photo. They think I'm too old, I said aloud. They think I can't handle this. I clenched my fists. But I will. The following week was a blur of appointments. Medical exam, background check, psychological interview, all designed to test if I could be trusted with my own blood. One woman with square glasses asked, "Do you have any history of depression?" I smiled thinly. I lost my son 6 months ago. If I didn't feel grief, that would be the problem. She didn't smile back. Each day I'd return to the hospital after the interviews, just to see Noah. The nurses began letting me help. Change his tiny diapers, feed him with a bottle, rock him to sleep. Every moment with him made me stronger. His small hand would wrap around my finger, and it felt like a promise. But behind every smile was fear, because I knew Vanessa was still out there. One afternoon, Detective Monroe called. "We've traced Vanessa's bank transfers," she said. "She moved the entire $200,000 insurance payout offshore, the Cayman Islands. She's smart. Careful. But we'll get her." I stared out the hospital window at the clouds. "She's not careful enough," I said quietly. "If she were, she wouldn't have left her son alive." When I hung up, I looked at Noah, sleeping peacefully, unaware that his mother had tried to erase him. I brushed a finger along his cheek and whispered, "Don't worry, little one. Grandma's got you now." Weeks passed. I installed safety gates, bought a crib, baby monitors, diapers, everything from the list. I spent nearly all my savings, and I didn't care. Then came the home inspection. Amber returned with another officer, this time unannounced. They checked every corner, every cabinet, every smoke detector. "We just have to be thorough," she explained. When they were done, she smiled, a real smile this time. "You're ready, Mrs. Carter. I'll submit my report. The judge should review it within 2 weeks." 2 weeks. That felt like an eternity. The next morning I went to church, the first time since Daniel's funeral. The pews smelled of old wood and candle wax. I sat in the back, staring at the stained glass window of an angel holding a child. I whispered, "If there's any mercy left in this world, please, let me keep him." When I got home that afternoon, there was a message from Detective Monroe. Her voice on the answering machine was tense. "Evelyn, we found new evidence. It's about Daniel's death. I need you to come to the station immediately." I froze. My pulse quickened. For a moment, the entire house felt smaller, as if the walls were leaning in. I turned toward the photo of Daniel on the mantel. Whatever they had found, I knew one thing: this wasn't over. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. Because whatever truth waited for me at that station, I was going to face it. For Daniel. For Noah. For the family that still deserved justice. By the time I reached the police station that evening, the sky had already turned a deep shade of violet. The streetlights flickered on, reflecting against wet asphalt. The city was settling into night, calm, unaware that beneath its quiet hum, one story of betrayal and justice was finally unraveling. Detective Monroe was waiting for me in the hallway outside her office. Her usual calm composure looked strained, the lines around her eyes seemed deeper. She gestured for me to sit, closing the door behind me. "Mrs. Carter," she began, lowering her voice, "we've made a breakthrough in Daniel's case." My pulse quickened. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the chair. "Tell me." She opened a folder on her desk. Inside were several photographs: Daniel's car, the highway guardrail, the crushed front hood, images I'd seen before, but now there were new ones, a close-up of the brake line, snapped clean, and a forensic report stamped Homicide Division. The car's brake fluid line was deliberately severed, Monroe said quietly. The cut was precise, made with a specialized tool used by mechanics. We traced a similar tool to a repair shop that serviced your son's car 2 days before the crash. The shop owner identified the woman who brought the vehicle in. I held my breath. She flipped another photo forward. It was Vanessa. Her long hair tied back, sunglasses covering her face, signing a receipt. Monroe's voice hardened. She used a fake name, but her signature gave her away. We matched it to her insurance forms. The room seemed to spin. The floor beneath me felt like water. She killed him, I whispered. The words came out hollow, broken. She killed my son for money. Monroe nodded grimly. We believe so. But that's not all. She slid another document across the desk, a bank statement. After your son's death, she deposited the insurance money into an offshore account. But last month, she withdrew nearly half of it in cash. My eyes narrowed. Why? That's what we're trying to find out, Monroe said. But it gets stranger. She recently rented a property under another alias in Charlotte, an hour away. We think she's still nearby. The air in the room grew heavy. She's still here? I asked. Monroe nodded. We're watching the property. But we can't arrest her until we have a warrant, and for that, we need irrefutable evidence, preferably something connecting her to the attempted murder of the child. I felt a surge of cold fury rise inside me. Then let's get it. Monroe gave a cautious smile. That's exactly why I called you. She leaned forward. Vanessa thinks you don't know she's alive. She also doesn't know we found the baby. If she suspects you're involved, she might come to you, to tie up loose ends. My stomach tightened. You want to use me as bait? Monroe didn't flinch. We'll protect you. But yes, she'll reach out when she realizes the police are closing in. She's desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. I sat there for a long moment, the sound of the ticking wall clock filling the silence. Then I said, slowly, fine. Let her come. That night, I drove home with the windows rolled down. The wind was cold, sharp against my skin, but it helped me think. The mansion loomed ahead like a shadow of its former self. Tall, silent, haunted. I parked the car, turned off the headlights, and just sat there for a moment. Somewhere out there, Vanessa Reed, the woman who'd smiled at me on my son's wedding day, was walking free. Breathing. Spending blood money. And I was supposed to sit and wait? No. That wasn't who I was anymore. I spent the next 3 days preparing. I didn't tell anyone, not even Detective Monroe, about what I was planning. I wanted to be ready, not helpless. I had security cameras installed around the property, silent alarms, motion lights, and a GPS tracker under my car. I even kept an old revolver from Martin's collection hidden in the drawer by my bedside. On the 4th day, the call came. I was feeding Noah at the hospital, humming softly, when my phone vibrated. The number was unfamiliar, but the moment I answered, my blood ran cold. Hello, Evelyn. Her voice. Calm, deliberate, and venom-sweet. I froze. Vanessa. A faint chuckle. You sound surprised. Did you really think I'd disappeared? I said nothing. My mind was already racing. The tone of her voice, the faint sound of cars in the background, the hum of traffic. She was nearby. What do you want? I asked. I just wanted to see how you were holding up, she said. I heard you've been busy lately. Hospitals, police visits. It's dangerous to dig into things that should stay buried. Like Daniel. I said coldly. Silence. Then, softly, you always were clever. Too clever for your own good. She paused before adding, I think we should talk. Face to face. You deserve closure. And I think we can help each other. I could hear the poison in her tone, the way snakes hiss before they strike. Where? I asked. She gave an address, an old cafe on the edge of town, the kind that had been dying for years. Tomorrow night. 8 o'clock. Come alone. Then the line went dead. When I told Monroe, she was furious. Absolutely not. You're not meeting her without surveillance. But I was calm. Too calm. She won't talk if she sees you. Let me handle this. We argued for an hour, but in the end, Monroe agreed to station officers nearby. They'd monitor from a distance, invisible but ready. The next night, I arrived early. The cafe sat half abandoned, its neon sign flickering weakly. I parked across the street and walked in. The air smelled of burnt coffee and rain-soaked wood. A single bulb buzzed above a corner booth, and there she was. Vanessa Reed. Her hair was dark again, tied neatly. She wore a black coat, sunglasses still on even though it was dark. When she looked up, she smiled like nothing had ever happened. Evelyn, she said, as if greeting an old friend. You look well. I sat across from her, every muscle tense. You murdered my son. Her smile didn't fade. That's such an ugly word. I prefer unfortunate accident. You cut his brakes, I said. And then you tried to kill his child. For the first time, her mask cracked. A flicker of irritation passed across her face. You think you know everything, don't you? You old fool. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. You weren't supposed to find him. That child was supposed to die with his father. But you had to interfere, like you always did. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay still. Every word she spoke was being recorded through the wire under my collar. I smiled faintly. You talk too much, Vanessa. Her eyes narrowed. And you don't talk enough. Then she reached into her purse. I froze. Before I could move, red and blue lights flooded the windows. Sirens wailed outside. Officers burst through the door, shouting, Police! Hands where we can see them. Vanessa stood there stunned as Monroe herself stepped in, gun drawn. Vanessa Reed, you are under arrest for the murder of Daniel Carter and the attempted murder of his child. The cafe erupted into chaos, chairs overturned, voices shouting. Vanessa's face twisted with rage as they handcuffed her. You think this changes anything? She screamed at me. You'll lose him too. The system will take him from you. I didn't respond. I just stood staring at her, the woman who had destroyed everything I loved, and said quietly, You took my son's life, Vanessa. But you'll never touch his legacy. As they dragged her out, rain started pouring again, hammering against the windows like applause from heaven. Monroe turned to me, her voice soft. It's over. But as I looked at the puddles reflecting the flashing lights, I knew better. It wasn't over. Not until I brought Noah home, for good. People think justice ends when the handcuffs click shut. But that's only the halfway point, the end of one war and the beginning of another. Because while Vanessa was behind bars, my real fight had just begun, the fight for Noah. The morning after Vanessa's arrest, I woke to sunlight for the first time in months. It spilled across my bedroom floor, golden and quiet, warming the space that had been cold since Daniel died. I stood by the window, coffee trembling in my hand, and whispered, It's done, my love. She's gone. But the peace lasted only a few hours. By noon, the phone rang. It was Amber Lewis from Child Protective Services. Mrs. Carter, she began carefully. First, I want to say congratulations on the progress in your son's case. However, there's been a development regarding Noah's custody." Her tone made my heart tighten. "What development?" Amber hesitated. "Vanessa Reed has filed a claim through her attorney, stating that she is the child's biological mother and has parental rights until a court rules otherwise. Given that she's not yet convicted, the court can't permanently terminate her rights." I gripped the counter to steady myself. "She tried to kill him," I said. "You know that. The police have proof." "I understand," Amber said softly. "But the law still requires due process. Until her conviction, she remains his legal parent. The judge will hold a custody hearing within the week." I felt the air leave my lungs. My mind flooded with the image of that baby gasping for air in the rain, the bin half submerged, the woman who had left him to die now daring to claim him as her own. After I hung up, I sat in silence for nearly an hour. The house around me felt enormous again, every tick of the clock mocking my helplessness. But helplessness wasn't in my nature. Not anymore. I called Detective Monroe. "She's trying to take the baby back," I said. My voice shook, but it wasn't fear, it was fury. "I figured she might," Monroe replied. "Her lawyer's good, ruthless, expensive. They'll argue temporary insanity or postpartum depression. They'll paint her as a grieving widow who made a mistake." "She didn't make a mistake," I hissed. "She made a choice." Monroe's tone softened. "I know, Evelyn. But to prove that, we'll need more than anger. We'll need evidence, character witnesses, and a custody strategy. I'll connect you with a lawyer I trust, someone who doesn't back down from monsters like her." The next morning, I met attorney Grace Holt, a woman in her 40s with a sharp mind and a voice that carried quiet authority. Her office smelled of old books and strong coffee. "I've read the case file," Grace said, flipping through papers. "This is going to be tough. Vanessa's lawyer will exploit every loophole. They'll say you're too old, that your grief makes you unstable, that your wealth isolates you from real parenting." I gave a dry laugh. "I buried my son and saved my grandson from a grave. If that's not parenting, I don't know what is." Grace smiled faintly. "Good. We'll need that fire. But you also need calm, control. Courtrooms don't reward rage, they reward proof." For the next few days, we prepared. She walked me through every question the opposing attorney might throw at me. "Why do you think you're fit to raise a newborn at 62? Do you have any health concerns? Isn't it true that your emotional trauma could affect the child's development?" I learned to answer each question with composure, not defiance, but dignity. Grace said, "The key is not to fight them. It's to make them look cruel for even asking." When I wasn't rehearsing, I was at the hospital with Noah. His tiny body was stronger now, his cheeks full, his eyes beginning to open wider each day. The nurses smiled when I arrived. They said he calmed faster in my arms than with anyone else. One evening, as I rocked him in the dim nursery light, I whispered, "They won't take you from me, Noah. Not the courts, not her, not anyone." He reached up, his small hand brushing my chin, the same way Daniel used to touch my face when he was a baby. My chest ached with love and grief so powerful it nearly brought me to my knees. The custody hearing came on a gray Monday morning. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and tension. Vanessa was escorted in wearing a beige prison uniform, her wrists cuffed but her head held high. Even in shackles, she carried arrogance like perfume. When she saw me across the aisle, she smirked. "Playing Grandma of the Year, I see," she whispered. I ignored her. Grace placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "Stay calm. Let her dig her own grave." The judge entered, a stern man with silver hair and a calm expression that betrayed nothing. The hearing began. Vanessa's attorney, A slick man named Mr. Langford rose first. He painted a tragic picture, a young widow suffering from postpartum depression, traumatized by her husband's sudden death, driven to irrational behavior. He argued that a moment of psychological collapse does not define a mother. Grace stood next. Her tone was quiet but sharp. "Your Honor," she began, "a moment of collapse doesn't involve cutting brake lines, transferring life insurance offshore, and attempting to drown a newborn in a construction site." The room went still. Then she turned to me. "Mrs. Carter, please describe what you witnessed." I stood, my palms trembling slightly. Every eye in the courtroom turned toward me. "I saw her dragging a storage bin toward a flooded pit," I said, my voice steady. "When I heard the baby crying, I screamed her name. She ran. I pulled that child out with my own hands. He wasn't breathing." I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I wrapped him in my coat and drove to the hospital myself. He survived because of me, not because of her." Vanessa's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced him. When Grace presented the photos, the pit, the bin, the forensic evidence, I saw Vanessa's face finally crack. Her hands tightened into fists, her jaw trembled. Then Grace dropped the final blow. "Your Honor, DNA tests confirm that Mrs. Carter is the biological grandmother, the only surviving blood relative. Vanessa Reed has proven herself not a mother, but a threat." The courtroom fell into silence. Even the sound of shuffling papers stopped. Finally, the judge spoke. "The court grants temporary custody of the minor, Noah Carter, to his grandmother, Evelyn Carter, pending final adoption review. Vanessa Reed's parental rights are suspended until further notice." The gavel hit wood, one clean strike that echoed through the room like thunder. I didn't realize I was crying until Grace handed me a tissue. Vanessa screamed as guards pulled her away, shouting words I couldn't even understand. But all I heard was my heart, steady, full, alive. When I stepped outside, the sunlight was warm on my face. I closed my eyes and whispered, "We did it, Daniel. He's coming home." When I finally walked out of that courthouse with the papers in my hand, it felt like I had been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. The sky above Raleigh was wide and blue, and the air carried that sweet scent of late spring, magnolia and rain. Reporters shouted my name as I descended the courthouse steps, flashes from their cameras bursting like lightning. But for once, I didn't hide from them. Because this story, my story, wasn't one of tragedy anymore. It was one of survival. Detective Monroe stood by the curb, waiting. She gave me a small, proud smile. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied softly. "We did it." Her expression grew somber. "The DA is pressing for first-degree murder and attempted homicide. Vanessa will likely spend the rest of her life behind bars." I nodded. "Good. Then she can spend every day remembering the life she threw away." I turned to see the black SUV parked by the curb. Grace Holt, my attorney, stood beside it holding a car seat. Inside it, tiny Noah, wrapped in a white blanket, sleeping peacefully. His small chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm, untouched by all the chaos that had built his world. When Grace handed him to me, the weight of that little body in my arms felt like redemption. My fingers trembled as I touched his cheek. His warmth, real, alive, fragile, seeped into my skin. "Welcome home, sweetheart," I whispered. "Welcome home." The drive back to the mansion felt like something out of a dream. Every tree, every road sign, every turn felt different, brighter, more alive. The house, once cold and silent, stood tall and open, sunlight spilling through its high windows. For the first time since Daniel's death, it didn't feel like a mausoleum. It felt like a home again. I had prepared everything: a nursery near my bedroom with soft yellow walls, a cradle that Martin had carved decades ago for Daniel, tiny baby clothes folded neatly in drawers. The moment I laid Noah down in that cradle, I felt tears well in my eyes. There he was, the continuation of my son's heartbeat. The second chance life had given me. I sat beside the cradle for hours, watching him sleep, the soft rhythm of his breathing filling the quiet room. I could still hear the storm from that night in my memory, the rain, the cries, the terror. But those sounds no longer haunted me. They reminded me how far I'd come, how far we'd both come. When the doorbell rang later that evening, I almost ignored it. But when I opened the door, I saw Monroe again, holding a small brown envelope. "I thought you'd want this," she said. Inside was a copy of the final evidence report, the one that would close the case for good. Photos, transcripts, confessions. Vanessa had broken down during interrogation. She admitted everything, cutting the brakes, forging documents, planning the insurance claim. "She said she never meant for the baby to survive," Monroe whispered. "But she also said something else, that she envied your family, your love. She thought money could replace that." I looked out toward the horizon. The sun was setting, golden light spilling across the fields, long shadows stretching over the earth Daniel once helped build. "Money can buy comfort," I said quietly, "but not peace." She never understood that. Over the next few weeks, the house filled with new sounds, the gentle cry of a baby, the clinking of bottles, the quiet hum of lullabies. The walls that once echoed with grief now carried laughter again, even if it was small and soft. Every morning, I'd sit in the garden with Noah in my arms, pointing out birds and flowers as if he could understand. Sometimes I'd tell him stories about his father, how Daniel built his first treehouse, how he stayed up late studying blueprints, how he used to call me every morning no matter where he was. "You have his eyes," I'd whisper. "The same light in them. The same kindness. Don't ever lose that." In the evenings, I'd light a candle beneath the photograph on the mantel. Martin's arm around Daniel, both smiling, and I'd whisper a prayer. "We're okay now. I promise you both he's safe." One night, Grace visited for dinner. We sat in the study while Noah slept nearby in his cradle. She smiled as she sipped her tea. "You know," she said, "I don't usually get cases like this. Most people give up before it's over." I almost did, I admitted. But every time I wanted to stop, I remembered Daniel's voice. I remembered that I wasn't just fighting for justice, I was fighting for love. Grace nodded. "You've built something stronger than money, stronger than fear." I smiled faintly. "I suppose I built it the way Martin taught me, one brick at a time." Months passed. Summer came. The trial concluded with a guilty verdict. Vanessa Reed was sentenced to life without parole. When I heard the news, I didn't celebrate. I simply closed my eyes, held Noah close and whispered, "May God forgive you, because I can't." The city moved on, but my world finally stood still, in peace. Carter Construction continued to grow under new leadership, young architects Daniel once trained carrying his vision forward. Sometimes they'd visit and show me their designs, saying, "Mr. Carter used to talk about this project." It always made me smile. Noah turned 1 that August. We had a small celebration. Just me, Grace, Monroe, and a few close friends. We gathered in the garden Daniel once helped landscape. Balloons swayed in the warm breeze, and Noah's laughter filled the air like music. At one point, Monroe leaned over and said softly, "You've done something incredible, Evelyn. Most people don't survive grief like that." I looked down at Noah, his hands sticky with cake, eyes bright and full of wonder. "You don't survive it," I said. "You build around it. You let love fill the cracks." As the sun dipped below the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, I held Noah in my arms and whispered, "Your father's watching, little one. And I think he's proud of us." He giggled, reaching for my necklace, The same gold chain Martin gave me decades ago. I smiled, tears glistening in my eyes. For the first time in years, the silence in the house wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. Not an echo of what was lost, but the heartbeat of what had survived. And that's when I realized, this wasn't the story of a mother who lost everything. It was the story of a woman who refused to. Because love, real love, never dies. It simply finds someone new to live in.